Hi, I'm Jason Dorsey. You may have seen me on 60 Minutes, a Today Show, or over 200 other television shows. You may have seen me at an industry event or a Vermeer event. My mission, my passion, is solving the generational challenges facing this industry so you as a leader can drive faster results, which is so incredibly important, especially right now. I lead the Center for Generational Kinetics, which is a whole bunch of big words to basically say I study generations. And my mission is to separate myth from truth when it comes to all the different generations. Because so much of what is said about generations is not true, yet some of it is very true, and you probably feel it, maybe even on a day-to-day basis. Have you ever had a conversation with someone in a different generation? It was really important, and you explained as clearly as you could exactly what you needed them to know. And you knew at the end of that conversation, when they walked away, they had no idea what you just told them. Exactly. We live this every day. We live this with employees, team members, colleagues, even with our own family, and certainly in our community. In the time we have together today, I'm going to separate generational myth from truth. I'm also going to share with you specific actions that you can use right away to drive results. This is very personal to me. My family grew up in a business that relied on exactly the type of services that you provide. In fact, we do that today. What you do means so much to me. Where I want to start is sort of stepping back and describing what a generation is and what it is not. The way we define a generation at our research center is a generation is a segment of a geographically linked population that experience similar social and cultural events at roughly the same time in their maturation, leading to predictability by scenario. That was a mouthful. Basically what it means is a generation is a group of people born about the same time and raised in about the same place. But what's not talked about enough in this industry, and so important, is that within the same generation, you will see differences based on geography. I'm sure you've seen this. You'll see differences between urban and rural, people born outside the US who move here who are the exact same age as you. I grew up on a ranch way out in the country in rural Texas. My best friend is from New York City. He and I were born same year, same month, yet we have some different views of the world based on where we were raised. Yet we're certainly in the same exact generation. Or as I often joke, what happens in New York City ends up in my local retailers back in Brenham 2 years later. And there's a good reason for this. You know, when we think about trends and trends rippling across the country and the world, trends originate, they start in urban areas where you have population density and diversity, and then they ripple out. When we think about generations, what's really cool to me is that the younger you go, the more similar the generation is all the way around the world. I get to work in all these different countries, at least back when we all traveled. And what I found out through our research is that Gen Z, the youngest generation, is the most consistent generation in the world. Why is that? Access to cheap mobile phones. In some parts of the world, you even get the phone for free as long as you use it as a form of payment. So what we find is that young people all around the world are much more similar than if you go up to older generations where you can see pretty dramatic differences. So that's the type of insights I want to share with you today. So the first thing is this. This is really foundational. When you think about generations, please keep in mind that generations are not a box that each of us will fit neatly inside based on our birth year alone. It doesn't work that way. But what generations absolutely are, and we prove it through math, and we share these insights, and they've driven results in this industry so many times, generations are incredibly powerful and predictive clues to faster connect with, build trust, and drive influence. And I would argue that right now, during this incredibly challenging time, it has never, ever been more important than being able to effectively connect with, build trust, drive influence, and lead to the outcomes you need. And this affects everything from recruiting of employees, to onboarding employees, to retaining employees, developing talent, building loyalty, all of these things that you know are so incredibly important. And I'd argue maybe more important than ever. Think about safety. All of those are influenced by generations. So what makes generations predictive? Well, at our research center, we're studying the trends that shape the generations. Now, there's some trends that seem obvious and some that are not. Let me talk with you about the ones that are maybe less obvious. The number one trend that shapes generations, more than any other, parenting. How you are raised is the greatest influence of what you will go on to do in the workplace, even as a consumer. We learn from our parents, is a job beneath you? That's interesting. We learn, do you have to go to college? Is technical or trade school okay? Can you go right into the workforce? How young should you be when you start working? I know for me, I started working when I was 15. I had a hardship license, and I washed dishes, and I washed cars, and I was on a landscape crew, and I did all these things. So as we think about parenting, we learn from our parents. Work ethic, how to approach our future. Is debt okay? Can you use credit cards? Should you get loans to go to college? Now, sometimes we learn from our parents exactly what we want to do, and other times we rebel and say, oh, I definitely don't want to be like that. Now, when we think about parenting, what's the most important thing to know? When it comes to millennials, my own generation, I'm going to give you all the generational breakdowns. What I want you to see is that our parents were primarily baby boomers. Yes, baby boomers! When we think about baby boomers, they had a distinct parenting philosophy when it came to raising millennials. And if you're a boomer, you probably know what that philosophy is. So finish the sentence with me. That philosophy is we want it to be easier for our children than it was for us. And you succeeded! Great work! And what nobody likes to talk about, and everybody gets uncomfortable, particularly when I speak at industry events, but we're all in this together, so we're going to say it this way. When we think about parenting and raising children, entitlement as a behavior is 100% learned. You are not born entitled, you have to be raised that way. And in the case of millennials, it starts with parenting, reinforced in schools, and then we bring it right in to work. And we're like, hey, it's been a month. Where's my promotion? Now, we're going to talk more about that, and in particular, why millennials are two generations, not one. One aspect of the generation gets all the attention, but the other generation, because they've split apart, very different, doesn't get attention, and they're probably who you're employing. So parenting, number one trend that we study. Number two trend we study is technology. And what we've uncovered when it comes to technology is every one of us has a different natural relationship with technology that is largely driven by our age. And I'll prove it right now. Right? Think back to when you were a kid or a child or a teenager. What was the biggest technology breakthrough of your youth? What was that thing that when you saw it or you held it or you used it just changed your world? I'll give you some examples. Maybe going from black and white to color TV, or landing on the moon, or dial-up internet, or party lines. You didn't know I knew about party lines. Hey, what was that tech breakthrough? Maybe for some of you, Nintendo. Right? All of these things impacted us. But what I want you to notice, and this is sort of the key, is when you think back about that technology breakthrough, maybe it was 8-tracks, maybe it was remote control, maybe some of you wore the remote control before the remote controls. When you think back to all those different technologies that impacted you as you were coming of age, I want you to notice how different those are by generation. I'll give you an example. Here's my phone. I have an iPhone. It's my iPhone right here. When I call my daughter is 9 years old. Her name is Raya, R-Y-A. She's named after my great-grandmother, Raya. When my daughter turned 2, we found out that was not my great-grandmother's name. Yes, it's awkward. So when I call my daughter, who's 9 years old, from this iPhone right here, how do I call my daughter? She's in 4th grade. FaceTime, right? So she's looking at me, I'm looking at her, we have a whole conversation going on. My daughter, 9 years old, listen closely, my daughter, 9 years old, will never remember a time before you could look at the person on the phone while you were talking to them. And her belief set, and her mindset, what she believes to be true, that is how the phone works. When you talk with her, she'll tell you, phones were not made for talking, they were made for what? Video. One of our most important discoveries, and please listen carefully to this, we discovered that technology is only new if you remember it the way it was before. Otherwise, that's all you've ever known. My daughter does not remember a time when you talked on phones like this. To her, it's always been like this. I bet many of you remember dial-up internet and then broadband. You're going, this is amazing. But if you've only known broadband, you don't even know how good you have it. Am I right? Think about things like having to use a fax machine and all these different things. Unless you experience that, you don't know how good you have it right now. And that's not a fault of somebody who's coming of age right now. It's just all they've ever known. So when we think about technology and generations, number one, every one of us has a different natural relationship with technology that's largely driven by our age. and it's often invisible to us until we are forced to interact with someone who has a different relationship with technology. And then number two, technology is only new if you remember it the way it was before. Otherwise, that's all you've ever known. So at our research center, CGK, we study parenting and how people are raising their kids right now. We study technology, we study economics, mobility, all of these different things. And what we've uncovered is that right now in many organizations, likely your own, you're leading, managing, and motivating 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 different generations. This has never happened before, and it's creating all kinds of new challenges, even for the most established businesses, whether they're huge corporations, family-owned businesses, or only have one location, doesn't matter. All of them are experiencing this right now. And so what I want to share with you in the time we have is I want to talk specifically about 2 generations that are driving so much change. First, that's Generation Z, and then second, that'll be millennials. Let's talk about Gen Z and their birth years. Gen Z was born about 1996 to approximately 2015. Now, whenever I share birth years, just notice they're always approximate. Sometimes there's an event that separates one generation from the other, and other times there's a transitional period. For Gen Z, the key event that separates Gen Z from millennials was September the 11th, 2001. But the key discovery we made is Gen Z and millennials, when we think about 9/11, you have to be old enough to understand the event, put it in context for it to create fear of the unknown. Why is that important? What we uncovered is that Gen Z does not remember 9/11. And that's what separates Gen Z from millennials. For millennials like me, it was the defining moment of our generation. For Gen Z, it's something they learned about in history class or from a parent or older sibling. So Gen Z starts around 1996-ish, and they go to about 2015. The last capstone event for Gen Z is the COVID-19 pandemic. But again, you got to be old enough to understand it and feel the fear, the concern, everything that goes with that, the emotion. We'll talk more about that. So just notice, Gen Z is born about 1996 to approximately 2015. Millennials were born about 1977 to about 1995. Now that may be slightly different than you've heard elsewhere. Maybe you heard millennials born starting in 1980 or 81. Anywhere between 1977 and 1981 is easily the beginning of the generation. It took longer for trends to ripple across the country and around the world back then, so anywhere in that period of time would work. And then 1995 is a hard stop because you either remember 9/11 and it changed your view of the world, or you don't. Now when we think about the generation before millennials, that's Generation X. My wife is in Gen X. She will tell you they have the best music. I'm not going there, but just know Gen X certainly believes that. And Gen X was born about 1965 to 1976. And you may be saying, well, Jason, that seems a lot shorter than the other generations. You're right, but we believe that millennials could be 2 generations, not 1, which we'll talk about in a second. And then we get to baby boomers, who are born about 1946 to 1964. We believe that baby boomers are actually 2 generations, not 1, older boomers and younger boomers. But if I share that up front, people sort of freak out. But the key is older baby boomers and younger baby boomers had very different formative events when they were coming of age. So as you start to put that all together, you realize you have 2, 3, 4 generations, and maybe on your team, you even have traditionalists who were born before 1946. Maybe you have 5 generations in there. The key is this. You're leading, communicating, motivating multiple different generations, and what do you as a leader need to know to drive results now? Well, let's focus on Gen Z and millennials. First, let's talk about Gen Z. What do we need to know about them? 3 key things. Number 1, Gen Z was raised by parents who are primarily Gen X and millennials. Do they have some boomer parents? Sometimes, but the vast majority are Gen X parents and millennials. And what our research has shown, we've done a number of studies on this, is that parents of Gen Z raise their kids with this mindset or this mantra, and that is, you will not end up like one of those entitled millennials, which, by the way, I find offensive as a millennial, but we'll come back to that in a second. So the key is that Gen Z is being raised differently by their parents than the previous generations. Gen Z also came of age around the Great Recession. Now, there are people saying, oh, Gen Z struggled in the workforce through the Great Recession. That's not true. They were 12. But who struggled during the Great Recession? Their parents. And they heard about it, and they saw it, and they felt the fear. And what we've uncovered with Gen Z is that Gen Z is very conservative with their money, much more so than you would expect. Right now, when it comes to employers, we see from Gen Z, they want to know what benefits you have to offer. They're looking for stability. I mean, that's wild given how young Gen Z is. Gen Z is the fastest growing generation in the workforce right now, but they're still young. The oldest are around 25-ish years old. The key thing is this. Gen Z was raised differently. they have a different view of money. And then number 3, they have a different relationship with technology. Many of them do not remember a time before a smartphone, which is why they expect to be able to apply for a job completely on their phone, go through onboarding completely on their phone, go through learning completely on their phone, handle all of their banking, dating, education, all just on their phone. This is very different than even millennials who moved into that space, but they had already come of age like me with different experiences prior to the smartphone. So the key thing is this: Gen Z is not millennials 2.0. They have a very different perspective and attitude, and understanding and engaging them will take different steps than what works with millennials. And the key is to know that. But we've also seen with Gen Z is they can be highly loyal. They think they're going to have to work harder and longer in order to succeed in their career, and what they're looking for actually matches what this industry offers. So what you have to offer really is a perfect fit. It's just messaging it the right way. And that leads us to millennials. My people, millennials, whoop whoop. My people, millennials, yes, proud millennial here, which I know is weird because the reputation about millennials is so negative. If you look at any of the TV interviews or the news clips or the memes, millennials, our pants are falling off, we live with our mom, right? All this sort of stuff. What's not talked about is that millennials are actually the #1 largest generation in the United States workforce. There are more millennial managers, meaning they have direct reports, than any other generation in the United States. Millennials are finally driving new household purchases. They're driving wealth creation. There's a lot happening with millennials that absolutely does not match sort of the news narrative, if you will. In fact, I bet you have some great millennials who work for you. But the problem is, we all know some millennial who had that sense of entitlement, wanted to get a raise on their first day, sort of like the joke that I made earlier. And then that sort of is the label of the generation, but it's not accurate. One of our most famous discoveries, and if you're a millennial, you need to hear this. One of our most famous discoveries is that millennials have actually split into 2 different generations. You have one part of the generation doing everything we were told we were supposed to do. Told us to go to school, we went to school. Told us to get a job, we got a job. You told us to be on the work site, we're on the work site. We do exactly what you tell us to do, but nobody wants to talk about us. In all the media interviews I do, nobody wants to talk about millennials who have their act together, show up, do what they're supposed to do, and go home. Why? Because we're not controversial, we're not provocative, we're not clickbait on BuzzFeed, yet we show up, we do exactly what we're supposed to do, and we go home. Then you have the other part of the generation, what we call the millennials. So you have megalennials, which are those doing what they're supposed to do, just making it happen. Then you have millennials who are struggling to create real-world traction. Now, we've always had late bloomers, I know that, but late bloomers were 25, not 35. And as a generation splits or breaks apart, for some reason around the age of 30, we don't know why, we're trying to figure out, for some reason around the age of 30, millennials self-select into one part of the generation or the other, and they can no longer relate to the other part of their own generation. In fact, the group most offended by millennials acting entitled, other millennials who do not feel entitled, because we think the rest of the generation is giving us a bad reputation. That's why I'm not a millennial, that's what they say all the time. And then they take our surveys and it turns out they're a millennial. But we've just been branded poorly. So I'm going to challenge you to be open to the idea that millennials are hardworking, loyal, delivering tremendous value, and you probably have them on your team. Keep that in mind as we think of the generations. What do we need to know about millennials? The first is that millennials are not tech savvy. What we uncovered is millennials are actually tech dependent. Very big difference. They don't know how technology works. They just know they cannot live without it, which changes everything from communication and learning to safety training and on and on and on, how they want to be engaged. At the same time, what have we found? We found that millennials are experiencing a new life stage, which is called delayed adulthood. And that means they're hitting all the gateway markers to adulthood later. Things like getting married, buying their own home, all of this sort of stuff, having their first child are all moving back. The key is they're still doing it, they're just doing it later. What we also find with millennials is that millennials really want to have an impact from their very first day. They show up, they want to have an impact, which means onboarding is incredibly important so they can show up and feel like they're making a difference. So the key is you want to make sure and keep in mind that Gen Z and millennials are 2 very different generations. And when you think about young adults, emerging talent, talent development, just know they're 2 generations, not one. Both bring different skills, incredible value. The key is recognizing the mindset that they bring. In fact, one of the most important things we believe at CGK, and something that I'm a huge advocate for, is that every single generation brings value. Every single generation has something important to add. So just keep in mind, we need every single generation. In fact, I was speaking at an event, an actual live event a few months ago, and while I was backstage, we were doing all of our socially distanced, that whole thing, and I heard a young person say this, and he said, well, you know, I don't know why we're talking about baby boomers. They don't even know technology. And I had to stop him. And I was like, hey, baby boomers invented that phone you're using. They made it out of thin air. It did not exist. That smartphone you rely on, they made it. You can't even connect to the Wi-Fi. So just keep in mind, we need every single generation. What I want to talk about now is the impact of the pandemic across generations. This is something we have been studying very closely. One of the things that we've uncovered is there's this perception that generations are having the same experience during this period of time. And what we found is that's not true. The experience of this pandemic is very different by generation, geography, even gender and socioeconomics. I want to give you a quick generational snapshot of each of the different generational experiences so you can put that in context before I share with you the specific strategies you can apply right away. First, let's talk about Gen Z. What our research has uncovered is that Gen Z has sort of crashed into this pandemic right at the moment they were supposed to be becoming increasingly self-reliant. So they're supposed to be becoming increasingly self-reliant, moving into this adulthood phase, and what do we find? They maybe didn't go to college or university, or they had to come back. Trade school may have been put on hold. They had a job and they lost it. They were supposed to leave home and they never got to, or they left and they had to move back home. What we're seeing is that Gen Z has really borne the brunt economically of the pandemic. Our research shows that more than any other generation, Gen Z lost their job, had a reduction in hours or a reduction in pay due to the pandemic. They suffered from that last hired, first fired sort of situation. They also have the least established professional network. So for Gen Z, the oldest members, this is a really challenging period of time. But if you go down a little bit younger, what we see is that this forcing function of the pandemic has caused Gen Z, younger Gen Zers, to learn how to use online technology and go to school virtually and do all these things differently. And we believe that for some of them, this will actually become a strength going forward. My daughter goes to school virtually, right? She does it all online from home. She's got screens open, all these different things. And for her now, it's completely normal to record her presentation by video, upload it, have the teacher respond by a video, and then her continue on with her learning. And she's 9 and she thinks that's normal. Now there's going to be tremendous social and emotional consequences from this, no question. But there will be some new skills that the younger generation of Gen Z, the younger part, is going to be able to carry forward with them. The key that our research shows is the younger you are from the age of 18, the more you'll be able to adapt going forward, because you'll have the most runway ahead to be able to choose how you want to adapt, sort of enter that next stage, that next period. By the way, this happened before to millennials. They crashed in the Great Recession. Older millennials really struggled. Younger ones benefited from the recovery. Which leads us to millennials. What do we see in our millennial research right now? Millennials feel very much bookended by two terrible events. They crashed into the Great Recession up front, and now when they finally feel like they have momentum, they've crashed into this pandemic. So they really feel like they've been bookended with these two very, very challenging experiences. But remember, the generation is splitting, and some millennials are doing quite well right now, while others are really struggling. And then we look at Gen X. What our Gen X research shows is that Gen X is being pulled in 3 different directions. Gen X is often taking care of their parents, they're taking care of a child or children, and they're trying to navigate their own job or career. So they're really being pulled in 3 different directions. My wife is in Gen X. She talks frequently about trying to figure out how to help her parents, and we're constantly thinking about this. Her parents are in their 80s. How can we best serve them and help them through this difficult time? My wife is also trying to take care of our daughter, who's 9 years old, and my wife is running her business. So we have all these different things going on, and for her, that's a very typical Gen X experience. Taking care of parents, taking care of a child or children, and navigating career. So just know Gen X being pulled in lots of different directions. And then we talk about baby boomers. What have we seen from baby boomers? Our latest research shows that baby boomers have had to draw down on their emergency savings. They're really trying to figure out how do they cut down any costs that they have, and they're thinking, if we're able to go back to work, or if I am working, they're thinking maybe they're going to have to work longer than they anticipated. So they're going to actually extend their working life more because of this very horrible situation. The key is this: 4 different generations, 4 different experiences during this time of COVID-19, and that's important when you go to message and talk about leading and understanding each of the different generations. Now let's jump into specific strategies that you can use right away to drive results. The first strategy I want to share with you is to provide specific examples of the performance that you expect. This is so important right now. If you want somebody to dress a certain way, and let's just pretend, I know this is not the ideal example, but you'll get it. Let's just pretend that you said, well, Jason, our locations, the dress code is business casual. Oh, what does that mean? We show up and we have on khakis and flip-flops. Business casual. Or you say, Jason, it's so important to deliver good customer service. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean I text you or do I make eye contact? Like, how do we communicate? What does good customer service look like? So what do? Super simple. You make a short video of whatever it is that you expect and you let the new hires see that. Why? And this is not coddling. So please don't roll your eyes. This is actually the exact opposite. You give them that short video, shows them exactly what you want them to do. You make the video one time, every new person you hire can watch it. They learn faster, and the best part is, saves you a ton of time, and now you can hold them accountable. You cannot hold people accountable unless you give them a specific example, because when you say business casual or great customer service or any of those phrases, they mean something very specific to you, but they mean something different based on generation, gender, and geography. So remove all of that. Just show them what it looks like and then hold them accountable. You'll get a lot more results without paying them a nickel more, and it will save you a ton of time. I promise we use this all the time. Number 2, for the training and communication part, particularly when you're teaching a process, it's so often that you want to teach this in a linear format, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So as you think about that, just notice what our millennial and Gen Z research has taught us is that they are not linear thinkers. They are completely outcome driven. So what does that mean for you? Show them the outcome first, work backwards one time, and they will follow every single step. Whether that's safety, whether that's great customer service, whether that's writing a proposal, responding to a purchase order, an RFP, whatever it is, show them the end first, work backwards one time, and they will then follow every single step. The way I like to think about it, it's like giving them a video game. You give somebody in Gen Z a video game, first thing they do is they go online, they get the cheats codes, they skip to the end, they beat the game, and you say, you didn't win, you cheated. And they're like, high score, holla! But what nobody talks about is they then do what? They go back and they play the game from the very beginning. They just wanted to see the end first. Use that to your advantage. Next one. This one is a little bit personal, but I'm going to go there because I think it's important. How you let go of employees determines the attitude of those employees who stay. Without question, there are many, many businesses and companies and organizations that have to let go of people right now for any number of reasons. But what I'm seeing are people that are letting go of employees over Zoom. They're having you log into a Zoom and look at a list of names, and if your name is on there with everybody else, then you've lost your job. Right? That is horrible. The key is this. Do you have to let go of employees? Sure, it happens. It's part of business. But how you let go of those employees determines the attitude of those employees who stay. They're watching. Did you treat those other employees with dignity and respect and humanity? Or was it extremely impersonal? Why is this such a big deal? Because you need the best performance possible out of the employees who stay, and you don't want them to start looking based on how you let go of some other employees. Instead, show them how you honor their former team members or colleagues. Do it in such a way that they're inspired about who you are and what you stand for, and that way you get their loyalty versus the, wow, I saw how they handled that when the chips were down. I know that I need to look for a job when the time comes. Don't do this. Use this as an opportunity to build loyalty, to talk about your values and culture and what you stand for, and honor people in this difficult time. You will benefit massively if you do that, and it's better for everybody. Next one, I've been getting asked a lot, Jason, how do we get more applicants right now? Certain positions are hard to hire for. What we found is the best way to get more applicants is to make your initial job application completely mobile friendly. What does that mean? That means that they should be able to complete the actual job application on a mobile device, not have to go to a desktop or a laptop, and be able to save as they go. If you do that, you will find you get a lot more applicants because up to 85% of job seekers today are looking for jobs on their mobile device. And if they have to go to the multiple different screens or situations in order to complete it, they won't complete it. And here's the secret. When they start the application, collect their email or their mobile number, whatever one or both that you can collect. Then, if they don't finish the application within a week, but they started it, you send them a text or an email, whatever's allowed, and you say, hey Jason, I saw that you started your application. We'd love to see if we're fit to work together. Would you please complete the application? Here's a link so you can start right now. And what we found that for some of our employers, that is up to a 50% increase in terms of completed applications. I'm going to say that again. Some of our employer clients are getting up to a 50% increase in completed job applications if you send a text or an email to people that have started but not yet finished the application. That is a huge deal right now, particularly for specific jobs that are hard to hire. And then last one, I love this one. What we found is that particularly in this pandemic, Gen Z millennials need more frequent communication. Now hold on, this is not trophies, this is not coffee with you, this is none of that. What we find is they need that quick hit feedback, that just short 5-10 seconds. Could be once a week. Something as simple as, hey Jason, great work on that project. Or Jason, do you have any questions about this upcoming project? Anything like that. What it shows them is you know that they're on the team. That's it. It will actually save you a tremendous amount of time. In fact, what we've seen is that Gen Z and Millennial are not talked to right now during this period of time. They actually think they're going to lose their job, and you don't want to create that sort of mindset right now. That quick hit feedback has a huge difference. Why does this not happen? Because other generations were taught if your boss is talking to you, you're doing something wrong. Our research shows that Gen Z and Millennials were taught if your boss is not talking to you, you're doing something wrong. 5 seconds once a week can make a huge difference in engagement, motivation, loyalty, cost you zero, and drive the exact results you want. The last thing I want to share is why this message and being able to deliver it to you is so incredibly important. You know, I grew up in a rural town, and my family has always been in businesses that relied on the exact types of services that you provide. In fact, right now we have a family-owned business that does construction and development. What you do is absolutely essential. And I think so often you don't get recognized for the incredibly important difference that you make. So on behalf of me and my wife Denise and our family, I want to thank you so much for the difference that you make in communities across the United States. We are so incredibly grateful for you. Thank you.